She had been invisible her whole life. That was the thing about being poor in a world built for the rich. People looked right through you like you were made of glass. Her name was, and she was 23 years old. She worked as a cleaning staff member at the country club, one of the most expensive places in the city. The kind of place where a single bottle of wine cost more than her entire month's rent. The kind of place where people wore watches that could pay off her student loans twice over. Every evening she would clock in at 5 and clock out at midnight. 7 hours of mopping floors, scrubbing toilets, picking up napkins that guests dropped without a second thought. 7 hours of being nobody. And she was okay with that, really she was. At least that's what she told herself. Lived in a tiny studio apartment on the east side of the city. The walls were thin, the heating barely worked, and sometimes she could hear her neighbor's television through the ceiling at 3 in the morning. But it was hers. She paid for it with her own money, and that meant something. Her mother had always told her that pride wasn't about what you had. It was about how hard you worked for it. Her mother, God, she missed her mother. It had been 5 years since she passed away. Cancer. The kind that sneaks up on you and takes everything before you even have time to say goodbye. Had been 18, fresh out of high school, with dreams of going to music school. Her mother had been a pianist back in Vietnam, trained at one of the best conservatories in Hanoi before the war changed everything. She had come to America with nothing but the clothes on her back and a fire in her heart. She never got to play on the big stages she dreamed of. Life got in the way. Bills got in the way. Survival got in the way. But she made sure her daughter learned. Every single day after school would sit at their old keyboard, the one with 3 broken keys that they could never afford to fix, and her mother would teach her. Chopin. The greats. Her mother used to say that music was the one thing nobody could take from you. It lived inside you, in your bones, in your blood. Even if you lost everything else, the music would remain. But that wasn't true, was it? Because when her mother died, had to sell the keyboard. She had to sell almost everything just to pay for the funeral, just to keep the lights on, just to survive another month. And somewhere along the way, she stopped playing. She stopped listening. She stopped believing that music had any place in a life like hers. Now her fingers were rough from cleaning chemicals. Her back ached from bending over mop buckets. And the only music she heard was the distant clinking of champagne glasses and the fake laughter of people who had never struggled a day in their lives. Tonight was different, though. Tonight was the annual charity gala at the country club. The event was a big deal. Had heard the other staff members talking about it for weeks. Rich people from all over the region would come dressed in their finest clothes, write checks for causes they barely understood, and pat themselves on the back for being generous. It was a performance, really. A show of wealth disguised as kindness. Didn't judge them. Not really. She had learned a long time ago that judging people you didn't know was a waste of energy. Maybe some of them really did care. Maybe some of them went home at night and worried about the world just like she did. She would never know. Her job tonight was simple. Stay out of sight. Clean the restrooms every hour. Pick up any trash that made its way to the back hallways. And most importantly, don't embarrass the club. That last part was always unspoken, but understood. She arrived at work an hour early to help with the setup. The ballroom had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale. White flowers everywhere. Golden lights hanging from the ceiling like stars. Tables covered in silk cloths with centerpieces that probably cost more than her car. And in the corner, raised on a small platform, was a piano. Not just any piano, a grand piano, black and shining, with curves so elegant it almost looked alive. Recognized it immediately. A Model D, the kind of instrument her mother used to point at in magazines and say, "Someday, my love, someday you will play one of these." Someday never came. Stood there for a moment, frozen. Her heart did something strange in her chest. A squeeze, a pull, like the piano was calling to her across the room. She shook it off. Stupid, that was stupid. She had work to do. The guests started arriving around 7, watched from the shadows as they floated in, all silk and diamonds and perfect smiles. The men wore tuxedos that fit like they were born in them. The women wore gowns that swept the floor like whispered secrets. They all looked so comfortable, so confident, like they belonged exactly where they were. Had never felt that way, not once in her entire life. She kept her head down and did her job. Cleaned the bathroom, restocked the towels, wiped down the counters, emptied the trash, repeat, repeat, repeat. Around 9 o'clock, she heard a commotion near the ballroom entrance. Apparently, the entertainment for the evening had canceled at the last minute. Some famous pianist who was supposed to perform had gotten stuck at an airport 3 states away. The event coordinator was panicking. The guests were starting to notice the empty stage. Walked past the ballroom on her way to the supply closet. She glanced inside and saw the piano sitting there untouched, silent, waiting. The guests milled around awkwardly. Some checked their phones. Others whispered to each other with disappointed frowns. A few had already started heading toward the exit. And the piano just sat there. Beautiful, perfect, alone. Felt that pull again, stronger this time. Her fingers tingled at her sides. She could almost feel the keys beneath them, smooth and cool. She could almost hear the music that lived inside that instrument, waiting to be set free. She told herself to keep walking. This wasn't her world. This wasn't her place. She was the cleaning girl, the invisible one, the nobody. But her feet wouldn't move. She stood in the doorway, her mop in one hand, her heart beating so loud she was sure everyone could hear it. The piano seemed to glow under the chandeliers, like it was made of moonlight and promises. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, soft, gentle, full of love. Music doesn't care who you are, my love. It only cares what you feel. Took a breath. And before she could stop herself, she started walking toward the piano. She didn't know what she was doing. She didn't have a plan. All she knew was that something inside her had woken up after 5 long years of sleep, and it wasn't going to be ignored anymore. The ballroom was crowded, but nobody noticed her. Why would they? She was wearing her work uniform, plain black pants and a polo shirt with the club logo on it. She looked like exactly what she was: staff, help, background noise. She reached the platform, climbed the 2 small steps, and sat down on the bench. The leather was cool beneath her. The keys stretched out before her like an old friend she hadn't seen in years. And that's when someone finally noticed. A woman nearby turned and stared, then another, then another. Whispers spread through the crowd like ripples in water. Who is that? Is she staff? What is she doing? His hands hovered over the keys. Her whole body was shaking. This was a mistake. This was a huge mistake. But she couldn't leave now. She couldn't run away. Not again. Not this time. The whispers grew louder. Could feel them crawling across her skin like tiny insects. She kept her eyes on the keys, afraid to look up, afraid to see the faces staring back at her. Excuse me. A sharp voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. What do you think you're doing? Looked up. A woman in a red gown was standing near the platform, her arms crossed, her eyebrows raised so high they almost touched her hairline. She was dripping in jewelry, diamonds on her ears, diamonds on her neck, diamonds on her wrists. She looked like she had never cleaned anything in her entire life. I said, what do you think you're doing? The woman repeated. Her voice was louder now, and more people were turning to watch. Opened her mouth, but no words came out. What could she possibly say? I felt called to this piano. I used to play when I was younger. My dead mother taught me, and I haven't touched a keyboard in 5 years, but something inside me just broke open tonight. None of that would make sense to these people. None of that would matter. She's the cleaning girl, someone said from the crowd. A man's voice. Amused, condescending. I've seen her mopping the hallways." A few people laughed, not a lot, but enough. Felt her face burn hot with shame. Her hands dropped from the keys to her lap. She should leave. She should get up right now, apologize, and disappear back into the shadows where she belonged. That was the smart thing to do, the safe thing. But her legs wouldn't cooperate. They felt like they were filled with cement. "Sweetie." The woman in the red gown stepped closer, her voice dripping with fake kindness, the kind of kindness that wasn't kind at all. "This is a charity gala. These people paid a lot of money to be here tonight. They didn't pay to watch the help pretend to be a musician." More laughter, louder this time. His eyes stung. She blinked fast, refusing to let the tears fall. She would not cry in front of these people. She would not give them that satisfaction. "I think you should go back to your mop," the woman continued. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that cuts. "Leave the performing to the professionals." A man in a black tuxedo walked up beside the woman. He looked important, maybe a board member or a club executive. His face was stern, his jaw tight. "Young lady, I'm going to have to ask you to step away from the instrument," he said. His tone was calm but firm, the kind of tone you use when you're talking to a child who has misbehaved. "This piano is worth more than you'll make in 10 years. It's not a toy." 10 years, that's what she was worth to him. A decade of labor reduced to a single number, a single insult. Looked at the man, then at the woman, then at the crowd of faces behind them. Some looked annoyed, some looked entertained. A few looked uncomfortable, like they knew this was wrong but didn't want to say anything. Not one of them looked at her like she was a real person. And something inside shifted. She had spent her whole life being looked through, being stepped over, being dismissed. She had accepted it because she thought that was just how the world worked. The rich stayed rich, the poor stayed invisible, and people like her were never supposed to sit at pianos like this. But why? Why was that the rule? Who decided that her hands weren't good enough to touch these keys? Who decided that her story didn't matter? Her mother had played in concert halls back in Vietnam. She had been trained by masters. She had talent that could have taken her anywhere in the world, but life had beaten her down. Circumstance had stolen her dreams, and she had died in a tiny apartment, never getting the recognition she deserved. Wasn't going to let that happen to herself. Not tonight, not anymore. She looked up at the man in the tuxedo. Her voice came out quiet but steady. "Just give me 2 minutes." The man frowned. "Excuse me." 2 minutes, repeated. "That's all I'm asking. If I'm as bad as you think I am, you can throw me out. You can fire me, I don't care, but please, just let me play one song." The crowd went silent. The woman in red opened her mouth to object, but the man held up his hand. He studied for a long moment. His eyes were cold, calculating. She could tell he was weighing the options. On one hand, this was embarrassing. On the other hand, making a scene by dragging her off the stage might be worse. Finally, he shrugged. "Fine, 2 minutes, but when you make a fool of yourself, don't say I didn't warn you." He stepped back. The crowd shifted, creating a half circle around the platform. Could feel their eyes on her, waiting, judging, expecting her to fail. The woman in red smirked. This should be interesting. Turned back to the piano. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Her hands were trembling. Sweat was forming on her palms. What was she doing? She hadn't played in 5 years. 5 years. Her fingers were out of practice. Her muscles had forgotten the movements. She was about to humiliate herself in front of 100 wealthy strangers who already thought she was nothing. But then she looked at the keys, really looked at them, and suddenly she wasn't in the ballroom anymore. She was back in that tiny apartment, sitting on a wobbly bench, her mother beside her, guiding her hands, humming along to the melody. "Don't think," her mother used to say, "don't think about the notes, don't think about the technique, just feel. Let the music come from here." And she would tap's chest right over her heart. "Feel, don't think, feel." took a deep breath, then another. The room faded away. The whispers faded away. The woman in red, the man in the tuxedo, the judging eyes, all of it melted into nothing. There was only her, and the piano, and 5 years of silence that was about to end. She placed her fingers on the keys. They were cool and smooth, exactly like she remembered. Exactly like she had dreamed about on all those lonely nights when she wondered what her life might have been. Someone in the crowd coughed. Someone else whispered something and laughed. Didn't hear them. She was thinking about her mother, the way she smiled when finally mastered a difficult passage, the way she clapped her hands and said, "Again, again, one more time." The way she cried the first time played Chopin's ballade all the way through without a single mistake. She was thinking about all the years she had wasted being afraid. All the years she had convinced herself that her dreams were dead, that her talent was gone, that she was nothing more than a girl with a mop and a broken spirit. She was thinking about every person who had ever looked through her like she wasn't there. And then she stopped thinking altogether. Her fingers pressed down on the keys. The first note rang out into the silence. It was soft, almost fragile, like a bird testing its wings after a long winter. Then came the second note, and the third, and the fourth. And suddenly the music was alive. It poured out of her like water breaking through a dam. Years of grief, years of loneliness, years of pretending she was okay when she wasn't. All of it flowed through her fingers and into the piano, transforming into something beautiful. She was playing Chopin, the Ballade No. 1 in G minor, her mother's favorite piece, the one they had practiced together hundreds of times, the one that always made her mother cry. The notes filled the ballroom. They bounced off the chandeliers and wrapped around the silk tablecloths and floated up to the ceiling like prayers. And for the first time in 5 years, felt like herself again. The crowd had gone completely still. The woman in red had uncrossed her arms. Her mouth was slightly open. The man in the tuxedo was staring at the stage with wide eyes. Nobody was laughing anymore. Nobody was whispering. Nobody was looking through her. They were all just listening. And kept playing. The music moved through the room like something alive. It wrapped around the guests, pulled at their hearts, whispered secrets they had forgotten they knew. Fingers danced across the keys with a grace that surprised even her. It was like her hands remembered everything her mind had tried to forget. The ballade started soft and slow, gentle, like a lullaby, like her mother's voice on quiet Sunday mornings when the world was still asleep. Let herself sink into that memory, the smell of rice cooking in the kitchen, the sound of rain against the window, her mother humming along as practiced the same passage over and over until it was perfect. Those were the good days, before the diagnosis, before the hospital visits, before the world turned gray and cold. The melody shifted. It grew darker, more urgent. The notes tumbled over each other like waves crashing against rocks. This was the part that always scared as a child. It sounded like a storm, like chaos, like everything falling apart at once. But her mother had taught her to push through it. The storm is part of the story, she would say. You cannot have the rainbow without the rain. Played through the storm now. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, hitting every note with precision and power. The music filled every corner of the ballroom. It echoed off the walls and rose to the ceiling and pressed against the windows like it was trying to escape into the night. The guests stood frozen. Not a single person moved. Not a single person spoke. They barely seemed to breathe. The woman in the red gown had tears running down her cheeks. She didn't even seem to notice. Her hand was pressed against her chest like she was trying to hold her heart in place. The man in the tuxedo had taken a step back. His stern expression was gone. In its place was something softer, something almost like wonder. And still played. She wasn't thinking about the audience anymore. She wasn't thinking about her job or her uniform or the 100 pairs of eyes watching her every move. She was somewhere else entirely, somewhere deep inside herself where the music lived. She thought about her mother's hands. They had been small like hers, delicate but strong, hands that could create magic out of nothing. Hands that had held her when she cried, wiped her tears when she failed, clapped with joy when she succeeded. Those hands were gone now, buried in a cemetery on the edge of town beneath a simple headstone that could barely afford. But somehow, in this moment, it felt like they were still with her, guiding her, playing alongside her. The ballade reached its peak. The notes crashed together in a wave of emotion so powerful that felt tears streaming down her own face. She didn't try to stop them. She didn't care who saw. This wasn't about pride anymore. This wasn't about proving anything to anyone. This was about honoring the woman who had given her everything. Her mother had sacrificed so much. She had worked double shifts at a factory, standing on her feet for 12 hours a day, just so could take piano lessons. She had gone without new clothes, without vacations, without any of the small luxuries that make life a little easier, all because she believed in her daughter's gift. And what had done with that gift? She had buried it, locked it away, pretended it didn't exist because it hurt too much to remember. But not anymore. The music softened again, the storm passed. What remained was something fragile and beautiful, a melody that spoke of hope, of survival, of finding light in the darkest places. His fingers slowed. The notes became tender, almost hesitant, like a whisper, like a prayer. She could feel the room holding its breath. She could feel the weight of 100 hearts hanging on every note. These people who had laughed at her, who had dismissed her, who had looked at her like she was nothing. Now they were listening like their lives depended on it. And maybe, in some small way, they did, because everyone in that room had lost something. Everyone had buried a piece of themselves to survive. Everyone knew what it felt like to be invisible. They had just forgotten. The final passage approached, knew it by heart. She had played it 1,000 times in that tiny apartment, her mother sitting beside her, both of them crying by the end. It was the most beautiful part of the ballade, the part that broke you open and put you back together again. She played it now with everything she had, every ounce of love, every drop of grief, every moment of loneliness and fear and quiet desperation. It all poured out through her fingertips and into the keys and out into the world. The notes rang clear and true. They hung in the air like stars, like memories, like promises. And then silence. His hands hovered over the keyboard. Her chest was heaving. Her face was wet with tears. She felt empty and full at the same time, completely drained and completely alive. For a long moment, nothing happened. The room was so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. Then someone started to clap. It was slow at first, a single pair of hands somewhere in the back of the room, then another pair joined in, then another, and another. The applause spread like wildfire. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was filled with the sound of clapping hands. People were cheering. People were crying. People were standing up from their seats and turning toward the stage with looks of pure amazement on their faces. Looked up, stunned. She had expected to be thrown out. She had expected to be laughed at. She had expected to fail. She had not expected this. The woman in the red gown was clapping harder than anyone. Tears were still streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup, but she didn't seem to care. She was looking at like she was seeing her for the first time. The man in the tuxedo was shaking his head slowly, a disbelieving smile on his lips. He started walking toward the stage. Tensed, this was it. He was going to tell her to leave. He was going to remind her that she was just the cleaning girl, that this didn't change anything, that she still didn't belong here. But when he reached the platform, he didn't tell her to leave. Instead, he extended his hand. That was, he started, then stopped. He seemed to be struggling for words. That was the most incredible thing I have ever heard in my life. Stared at him, she didn't know what to say. She didn't know what to do. Her whole body was shaking. "Where did you learn to play like that?" the man asked. His voice was different now, softer, almost humble. Swallowed hard. "My mother taught me." "Your mother must be very proud." The words hit her like a punch to the chest. She closed her eyes for a second, fighting to keep her composure. "She passed away," said quietly, "5 years ago." The man's face fell. For a moment he looked genuinely sorry, not the fake sorry that rich people sometimes perform. Real sorry, human sorry. "I'm so sorry," he said, "but I think she would be very proud of what you did tonight." Nodded. She couldn't speak. The tears were coming again, and this time she knew she wouldn't be able to stop them. The crowd was still applauding. Some people had pulled out their phones and were recording. Others were wiping their eyes. A few were hugging each other like they had just witnessed something miraculous. And maybe they had. Because in that moment wasn't the cleaning girl anymore. She wasn't invisible. She wasn't nobody. She was a pianist, a daughter, a survivor. She was exactly who her mother had always believed she could be. The applause lasted for what felt like forever. Sat at the piano bench, her hands trembling in her lap, unsure of what to do next. She had never experienced anything like this. The attention, the praise, the feeling of being seen. It was overwhelming, almost too much. People started approaching the stage. They came in waves, each one wanting to shake her hand, to congratulate her, to ask her questions she didn't know how to answer. "That was absolutely beautiful. How long have you been playing? Why are you working here when you can play like that?" Tried to respond, but the words kept getting stuck in her throat. She wasn't used to this. She wasn't used to people looking at her with admiration instead of indifference. She wasn't used to mattering. The woman in the red gown pushed through the crowd. Up close, could see that her mascara had run down her cheeks in dark streaks. She didn't seem embarrassed by it. If anything, she seemed transformed. The coldness from earlier was completely gone. "I owe you an apology," the woman said. Her voice was shaking. "What I said before, it was cruel, it was wrong. I had no right to speak to you that way." Blinked. She hadn't expected this. She had expected the woman to disappear into the crowd and pretend the whole thing never happened. That's what people usually did when they were proven wrong. They vanished. But this woman was standing right in front of her, tears in her eyes, asking for forgiveness. "It's okay," said quietly. "No, it's not." The woman shook her head. "I judged you because of what you were wearing, because of your job. I looked at you and decided you were less than me, and I was so wrong." She reached out and took his hand in both of hers. Her grip was warm, real. "Thank you," the woman whispered. "Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for showing all of us what we almost missed." Didn't know what to say, so she just nodded, and for the first time that night she smiled. The crowd eventually began to thin. People returned to their tables, to their conversations, to their expensive wine. But something had changed. The energy in the room was different, lighter, more honest, like music had cracked something open inside all of them. She was about to step down from the platform when a voice stopped her. "Excuse me." Turned. An older woman was standing at the edge of the stage. She looked different from the other guests. Her dress was elegant but simple. No diamonds, no flashy jewelry, just a string of pearls around her neck and silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. But it was her eyes that caught attention. They were sharp, intelligent, the kind of eyes that saw everything. "May I speak with you for a moment?" the woman asked. Hesitated. "I should probably get back to work. I'm already going to be in trouble for." "Please," the woman smiled gently. "Just a few minutes. I promise it will be worth your time." Something about her tone made pause. There was no judgment in it, no condescension, just genuine interest. "Okay," said. They walked to a quiet corner of the ballroom, away from the noise and the stares. The older woman studied for a moment before speaking. "My name is Doctor," she said. I'm the director of the Conservatory of Music. Felt her heart skip. The conservatory. She knew that name. Everyone who had ever dreamed of playing music professionally knew that name. It was one of the most prestigious music schools in the country. The waiting list was years long. The tuition was astronomical. It was the kind of place that girls didn't even bother dreaming about. I've been attending these galas for 15 years, Doctor continued. I've heard a lot of performances, some good, some mediocre, a few truly exceptional. She paused. What you did tonight falls into that last category. His mouth went dry. Thank you, that means a lot. I'm not saying it to be kind. I'm saying it because it's true. Doctor tilted her head slightly. Where did you study? I didn't, not formally. My mother taught me at home. Your mother was a pianist. She trained in Vietnam, at the Hanoi Conservatory, before she came to America. Doctor's eyebrows rose. The Hanoi Conservatory, that's an excellent program, or at least it was before the war disrupted everything. She looked at with new understanding. Your mother must have been very talented. She was, his voice caught. She was the most talented person I've ever known. She just never got the chance to show it. Doctor nodded slowly. And you, when did you stop playing? The question hit harder than she expected. She looked down at her hands, the rough skin, the short nails, the calluses from years of scrubbing and mopping. 5 years ago, she said, when my mother died. And tonight was the first time since then. Yes. Doctor was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was soft. Do you know what I heard in your playing tonight? Beyond the technique, beyond the skill. Shook her head. I heard someone who has been holding their breath for 5 years and finally decided to exhale. Doctor reached into her small purse and pulled out a business card. I want you to come see me, next week, at my office. Stared at the card like it might disappear if she blinked. I don't understand, she said. I can't afford the conservatory. I can barely afford my rent. Did I say anything about money? Doctor smiled. We have scholarship programs, full rides for exceptional students, and what I saw tonight was exceptional. His hands were shaking again, this time not from fear, from hope, a feeling she had almost forgotten existed. Why, she whispered, why would you do this for me? You don't even know me. Doctor studied her for a moment. Then she did something unexpected. She reached out and gently touched his cheek. It was a motherly gesture, warm, tender. Because I know what it feels like to be underestimated, she said quietly. I know what it feels like to have a gift that the world doesn't want to see, and I know what it feels like to almost give up. She dropped her hand. Someone gave me a chance once when I had nothing. Now I'm giving that chance to you. Couldn't stop the tears. They rolled down her cheeks, hot and fast. She had spent so long believing that her story was over, that the best parts of her life had died with her mother, that she would spend the rest of her days invisible and forgotten. But here was this woman, this stranger, offering her a door she thought had been locked forever. I don't know what to say, managed. Say you'll come. Say you'll let me hear you play again. Say you'll stop hiding. Looked at the business card in her hand. Doctor's name was printed in elegant gold letters. Beneath it was an address, a phone number, a future. She thought about her mother, about the dreams she had carried across an ocean, about the sacrifices she had made so that could have a chance that had thrown away because she was too scared, too hurt, too broken to reach for it. But maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe the music was still there, waiting for her to come back. Maybe her mother was still there too, somewhere beyond the silence cheering her on. Closed her fingers around the card and looked up at Doctor. I'll be there, she said. And for the first time in 5 years, she actually believed that things could get better. 3 years later stood backstage at the Grand City Concert Hall. Her palms were sweating. Her heart was racing. Some things never changed. But everything else had. She was no longer the girl with the mop. No longer the invisible cleaner who scrubbed toilets and emptied trash cans. She was a graduate of the conservatory, top of her class, recipient of every award they had to give. Her name had been in newspapers. Her face had been on magazine covers. People who used to look right through her now lined up for hours just to hear her play. It still didn't feel real sometimes. She would wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced it had all been a dream, that she was still in that tiny apartment, still grieving, still alone. But then she would see the piano in the corner of her new place, the beautiful upright she had finally been able to afford, and she would remember. This was her life now. This was who she had become. Tonight was the biggest night of her career so far. A sold-out performance at the most famous concert hall in the city. 2,000 seats, and every single one of them was filled. Critics from all over the country had flown in just to hear her. Record labels were sending representatives. This was the kind of opportunity that most pianists only dreamed about. And was terrified. Not because she doubted her talent. She had worked too hard for that, practiced until her fingers bled, studied until her eyes burned, pushed herself further than she ever thought possible. She knew she was good, maybe even great. No, she was terrified because of what this night meant. She was going to play her mother's song. Not Chopin, not any of the famous composers whose names filled concert programs around the world. Tonight, she was going to play a piece that her mother had written, a piece that had never been performed publicly. A piece that had found tucked away in an old notebook after the funeral, hidden between grocery lists and faded photographs. It was called Letter to My Daughter. Had spent the last 2 years learning it, perfecting it, understanding it. Every note was a message from beyond the grave. Every chord was a hug she could no longer receive. Every pause was a silence filled with all the things her mother never got to say. The first time she played it all the way through, she cried for 3 hours straight. Now she was about to share it with the world. A stagehand appeared at her side. 5 minutes, miss. She nodded, took a deep breath, smoothed down the front of her dress. It was simple, black, elegant. Her mother would have loved it. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the years of poverty, the grief, the night at the country club when everything changed, doctor's kindness, the scholarship that had opened doors she never knew existed, the teachers who believed in her, the friends who supported her, the audiences who cheered for her. And through it all, her mother, always her mother, guiding her from somewhere she couldn't see but could always feel. Mom whispered to the empty hallway, "I hope you're watching." The lights in the auditorium dimmed. The crowd fell silent and walked onto the stage. The applause was immediate and overwhelming. 2,000 people clapping, cheering, calling her name. Smiled and bowed, but she barely heard them. Her eyes were fixed on the piano. It was a Model D, just like the one at the country club all those years ago. Just like the one her mother used to point at in magazines and say, "Someday, my love." Someday was finally here. Sat down on the bench, adjusted the microphone, and for the first time ever she spoke to her audience before playing. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "Before I begin, I want to tell you a story." The room was perfectly quiet, 2,000 people holding their breath. 7 years ago, my mother passed away. She was a pianist, one of the best I've ever known, but life wasn't kind to her. She never got to play on stages like this. She never got to hear audiences like you applaud for her. She spent her whole life teaching me, believing in me, sacrificing everything so that I could have the chances she never did. Paused. The tears were already forming, but she didn't fight them. After she died, I stopped playing. For 5 years, I didn't touch a piano. I thought the music had died with her. I thought that part of me was gone forever. She looked out at the crowd. Somewhere in the darkness, she knew Doctor was sitting, the woman who had changed her life with a single business card. But I was wrong. The music never left. It was just waiting for me to be brave enough to find it again. She took a breath. Tonight I'm going to play something that has never been performed before. My mother wrote it. She called it Letter to My Daughter. I found it after she passed, hidden in an old notebook. I've spent years learning it, and now I want to share it with all of you. She placed her fingers on the keys. This is for her. This is for everyone who has ever felt invisible, and this is for everyone who has ever lost someone they love. She closed her eyes, and she played. The music that filled the concert hall was unlike anything the audience had ever heard. It was soft and sad and beautiful. It was a mother's love translated into notes. It was a lifetime of sacrifice and hope and dreams that never came true, except through the daughter who was playing them now. Didn't think about the critics. She didn't think about the record labels. She didn't think about her career or her future or any of the things that usually occupied her mind. She thought about her mother's hands, her mother's voice, her mother's smile. She thought about the tiny apartment where she had learned to play, the broken keyboard with the 3 dead keys, the hours of practice that had felt like a game back then, before she understood what her mother was really giving her. She thought about the last time she saw her mother alive, how small she had looked in that hospital bed, how she had squeezed hand and whispered, "Don't stop playing, promise me." Had promised, and then she had broken that promise for 5 long years. But not anymore, never again. The music swelled. It rose and fell like waves on an ocean. It told the story of a woman who had crossed the world with nothing but a dream, a woman who had given up everything for her child, a woman who had never stopped believing, even when the world gave her every reason to quit. And then, at the very end, something happened. The final notes were soft, gentle, almost like a whisper, and in that whisper heard her mother's voice. "I'm proud of you, my love, I always was." The last note faded into silence. For a moment nothing happened. The concert hall was perfectly still. Then the audience erupted. People leaped to their feet. They cheered, they cried. They clapped so hard their hands must have hurt. It was the loudest, longest-standing ovation of life. But she barely noticed. She was looking up at the ceiling, tears streaming down her face, smiling at someone no one else could see. "I kept my promise, Mom," she whispered. "I finally kept my promise." And somewhere, in a place beyond music and memory, she knew her mother was smiling back.